All right, welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. And you know how this works. We take something you're grappling with, something you've been reading or thinking about, and we kind of dive in together, try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, we take your sources and, really unpack them, find the juicy bits, see what we can learn from them.
In today's deep dive, well, this one's all about a concept that came directly from you. We're talking about oppositionality.
That's right. And at first glance, it might seem like just a fancy word for stubbornness or being difficult. But we're going deeper than that.
We are. We're going to explore this thing called counterwill. And to kick things off, your material introduces us to this really intriguing guy, Stephen.
Ah, yes, Stephen. A 38-year-old labor relations officer, and on paper, he sounds pretty successful.
Oh yeah, he's known for his creative problem-solving skills. Super effective negotiator, often finds common ground where others just, hit a wall. But there's this thing,
There's always a but, right?
right, there's this pattern of impulsive risk-taking.
Yeah.
And, it's landed his company in some hot water more than once.
Not exactly the picture of stability you'd expect from someone in his position. So what's the deal with Stephen? What else did your source material tell us?
Well, alongside this professional success, there's this pretty big regret he carries with him, giving up music.
Ah, so there's more to the story. Tell me about his musical background.
So he was apparently an incredibly talented clarinetist. We're talking National Youth Orchestra level talent. Like, could have had an international solo career, that kind of thing.
Wow, that's some serious talent. But he gave it all up.
Yeah. At 16, he just quit.
Ah,
And the reason he gave, pure defiance against his dad. See, his dad had him on this crazy practice schedule, 4 hours a day, every day, and apparently even resorted to, physical punishment if he didn't comply.
Oh, wow, that's intense. So this decision to quit, was that something he came to regret?
Oh, absolutely. He called it the stupidest thing I have ever done. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, the author of your chapter, they suggested something pretty radical.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did they say?
They told Stephen flat out that quitting music was one of the most necessary things you have ever done.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty strong statement. There has to be a powerful reason behind that, right?
There is. And it all ties into this concept of counterwill. The author's argument was that if Stephen had continued under that kind of pressure, that control from his dad, it would have been like a psychological submission.
Ah, I see where this is going. His sense of self, his own will, would have been completely overshadowed.
Exactly. So even though quitting went against his passion, his talent, and, even what he thought were his own best interests later on, it was ultimately a reaction to his father's will, not a freely chosen act.
It wasn't true will in action, but counter will. An automatic pushback against feeling controlled.
Exactly. And that takes us to Gordon Neufeld's work, which you highlighted in your source material.
Right, Neufeld, he describes counterwill as this automatic resistance to another person's will, especially when someone's sense of self is still forming. Like it's a knee-jerk no, driven by a deep fear of being controlled.
So it's like a defense mechanism?
Yeah, you could say that. But it's a pretty immature one. And the book makes this crucial point that counterwill isn't the same as having a strong will.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying they're not the same.
Not at all. In fact, it often signals the lack of a well-developed will. True will is about conscious decision-making, acting on your own values and beliefs. Counterwill, well, it's reactive, often unconscious, like an impulse you can't quite control.
And I'm already seeing how this could totally change the way we see kids, especially those labeled as willful or stubborn, like a lot of children with ADD.
Like, absolutely. It challenges those labels, doesn't it? Makes you wonder if what we're seeing is actually counterwill in action, not some inherent flaw in their character.
Yeah, and if it's a reaction to their environment, well, then that means we as adults, we have a role to play in how this dynamic unfolds, right?
Right. It's a two-way street. So I'm curious, how does this counterwill actually show up? What does it look like in everyday life?
Well, the chapter gives some pretty clear examples. You have the obvious verbal resistance, I don't have to, you're not the boss of me, that kind of thing. It's like they're putting up a wall, right?
A psychological immune system trying to fend off any influence that feels controlling. Classic.
Exactly. And then there's the more passive resistance. Think of a parent trying to get their kid with ADD to hurry up. And the more they push, the slower the kid seems to move.
Oh, I've seen that firsthand. It's like they're digging in their heels, resisting every step of the way. So frustrating.
And it might not even be intentional. It could just be this powerful internal resistance, like a reflex. But then, here's the question that popped into my head. If counterwill can be so disruptive, so negative, why does it even exist in the first place?
That's where it gets fascinating because the chapter argues that counterwill actually serves a vital purpose in development. In toddlers, it's all about individuation, right? It helps them separate from their parents, figure out what they like and dislike.
Ah, so all those no's aren't just them being difficult, it's actually them figuring out who they are.
Exactly. The book uses this great analogy comparing counterwill to a fence around a young plant. It protects that fragile sense of self from being overwhelmed, gives it space to grow.
I love that. And then in adolescence, counterwill helps teens loosen that dependence on their family. You know, break free from the cocoon, as the book puts it, of parental expectations.
Yeah, they push back against the norms, test boundaries, and in doing so, they carve out space for their own unique identity to emerge. And there's this great quote from Dr. Neufeld that really captures this. Far from being depraved, counterwill is bequeathed by nature to serve the ultimate purpose of becoming a separate being.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's not this inherent flaw, but this natural force that drives us towards independence. And that makes me think about the link the chapter makes between counterwill and ADD.
Yeah, that's an important connection. And the key factor there is sensitivity. Individuals with ADD, they often experience things more intensely, right? Including any kind of pressure or force, even if it's well-intentioned.
So a gentle nudge for one kid might feel like a huge shove to a child with ADD.
Exactly. And that amplifies their counterwill response. It's like the volume's cranked way up on any perceived attempt to control them.
And I can see how that easily spirals, right?
hmm
Disapproval leads to insecurity, which leads to acting out, which leads to more control from adults, which just fuels more resistance. It's a vicious cycle.
It is. And the chapter also brings up the underdeveloped self-regulation that's common in ADD, and that plays a role too, right?
Absolutely. Because of those differences in self-regulation, their reactions, their resistance, can be a lot more immediate and dramatic. What might be a subtle no in another kid can come across as defiance or rudeness.
It's like they don't have that same filter, that ability to pause and think before reacting. And then the chapter mentions this other interesting piece, the one-dimensionality of emotional processing in ADD.
Oh yeah, that was fascinating. It's like similar to young kids, their emotions can be very all or nothing. One minute they're happy, the next they're completely overwhelmed by anger, and it's like everything else just disappears.
And remember, counterwill often gets stronger when that sense of connection, that secure attachment, feels threatened. So in those moments of intense emotion, especially anger, their resistance can really spike.
It's like all they can see is that one emotion, that need to push back, and all other considerations just vanish. So, with all this in mind, the chapter then tackles those common parenting and teaching approaches that can actually backfire big time when dealing with counterwill.
We're talking about coercion, right? Both the positive and negative kinds.
Yep. Whether it's threats and punishments, what they call negative coercion, or promises and rewards, the so-called positive coercion, the chapter argues that these methods just aren't effective in the long run.
Because the core issue is the feeling of being controlled, manipulated. It doesn't matter if it's a punishment or a reward, the individual senses that someone else is trying to impose their will, and that triggers their defenses.
Right. And the chapter even brings in some really cool studies to back this up. Remember the one with the magic markers?
Ah, yes, the classic magic marker experiment. They took kids who loved playing with markers and divided them into groups. One group got no reward, one got a surprise reward, and the last group was promised a reward beforehand.
And the results were pretty mind-blowing, right?
They were. The kids who were promised the biggest reward, they actually showed the least interest in playing with the markers afterwards. It's like being rewarded actually undermined their natural enjoyment.
Almost like a counterintuitive thing, right?
Mm.
You think rewards would encourage them, but it seems like it backfired.
Exactly. And the chapter also mentions Edward Dici's work on intrinsic motivation. He did this experiment with college students and puzzles, and it showed that those who were paid to solve the puzzles were way less likely to keep playing once the money stopped.
So the takeaway is external rewards can actually kill that internal drive, that love for the activity itself.
Exactly. And this ties back to Stephen and his music, right? Even though his dad probably thought he was nurturing his talent, those forceful methods just extinguished Stephen's passion and fueled his resistance to the point that he walked away from it all.
It's a good reminder that our intentions don't always match the outcomes, especially when we're talking about these complex psychological dynamics.
Mhm.
So if coercion isn't the answer, what is the goal when we're trying to address counterwill?
The chapter suggests the ultimate goal is to help the individual develop a healthy, strong sense of self. Someone who's emotionally secure, they don't automatically go into opposition mode. They might choose to resist, but it comes from a place of knowing themselves, their boundaries, not just from this knee-jerk reaction to feeling controlled.
So it's about building that inner strength, that confidence in their own choices.
Exactly. And the book points out that for someone with a fragile sense of self, even a small suggestion can feel like a threat. But when that inner core is solid, there's this sense of, I can handle this. I can listen to what you're saying, even do what you're asking without losing myself.
It's like they have this inner trust that they won't be swept away by someone else's will. And
Yeah,
that makes cooperation so much easier, right?
absolutely. So the problem isn't that they're too strong-willed, it's that their inner self still feels too vulnerable. And by understanding counterwill, we can shift our focus. Instead of trying to control their behavior, we can help them strengthen that inner core, that sense of who they are.
And that brings us back to the idea that this is a two-way street. It's about creating an environment that feels safe, respectful, and that fosters secure attachment.
That's where true growth happens. When they feel secure and supported, that chronic counterwill can loosen its grip and their true self can start to blossom.
So, to wrap up our deep dive today, we've explored counterwill as this natural part of development, something that can be particularly strong in individuals with ADD because of their heightened sensitivity. And it's crucial to remember, it's a reaction to feeling controlled, not a sign of being inherently difficult or defiant.
It's about self-preservation, about protecting that emerging sense of self. And when we understand that, it changes everything. It helps us move away from judgment and towards compassion, towards creating those supportive relationships that allow kids and even adults to truly thrive.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about how often we might misinterpret those resistant behaviors. So here's a question for you, our listener. Think about times in your own life or in your relationships where you've encountered resistance. What if, just what if, some of that was rooted in this counterwill dynamic rather than being a deliberate choice to be difficult?
How might things shift if we approach those situations with this new understanding, with more empathy and sensitivity? Food for thought, right?
Yeah. It is. It's a subtle but profound shift in perspective. And hopefully it can help us all build more understanding and supportive relationships. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of counterwill. We hope you found it as insightful as we did.
Until next time, keep those sources coming. We'll be here, ready to dive in with you.
See you then.